Hey guys, welcome back to another Q&A. It is September 3rd, 2019. This week it was open, so of course we have a variety of questions, and I'll dive right into them here. So first one is, when it comes to, what does it mean if your fasted blood glucose levels are in the 70s, but postprandial blood glucose after 2 to 3 hours is higher? I would assume it's just digestion from the composition of the meal, or are there medical symptoms or other things in general related to causing the readings to be higher than the fasted? Well, couple things right off the bat. So obviously when you eat a meal, you have insulin being released from your pancreas to compensate for whatever glucose is coming in. So that's going to be how your blood glucose returns back to normal for the most part there. Now in the morning you have hepatic release from your liver, so you're going to have a rise from the waking response. Cortisol goes up, blood sugar goes up, gets you ready to go, wakes you up. There's going to be other variables there that could raise that morning blood glucose, and like stress, poor sleep, all those things, high cortisol. So that blood glucose might not be exactly the same as your postprandial. Now, in most healthy people, when all the variables are pretty controlled, they're usually pretty close to the same. It's hard to give a number, maybe within 5 to 10 points up or down, but it might not always be exactly the same. Typically, I would see fasting slightly higher than postprandial in a lot of people, and that's probably just because people are too stressed out, to be honest. But now, there's nothing necessarily wrong with this. It's not a medical issue or anything. And yeah, it could be composition of the meal. A lot of people will check postprandial 2 hours after a meal, and a lot of times that's not enough time for it to return to baseline, depending on what you're consuming, especially people eating a decent amount of food and a meal that might have protein or even a little bit of fat in it with the carbohydrate. It's going to take some time to return to normal. Normally, I suggest about 2.5 hours or just before your next meal. So if your meals are 3 hours apart, eat your meal and check the blood glucose before you eat your next meal. So maybe that's 3 hours away or 2.5 hours. That's an easy way to do it. That's probably going to be your baseline. But yeah, if there's overlap in digestion, you might notice that. One way you can kind of see that is try eating a carbohydrate meal earlier in the day and check it, and then do it on another day and check it later at night and see, so let's say post-workout meal, you're checking it 2.5 hours after a post-workout meal that has a lot of carbs in it. Maybe on a weekend or something, if you train earlier in the day, check it. And then if a weekday, if you're training after work or something, for example, then check it later at night. You might see that there's that overlap in digestion. Things start to accumulate and back up a little bit as the day goes on, and you'll see a higher postprandial later in the day than you will earlier in the day, which is normally just a result of the digestion. But again, we're looking at a range here. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to vary day to day. There's a lot of other factors outside of meal composition and that are going to impact blood glucose. So I wouldn't get too hung up on it being a little bit higher, as long as you're generally in a pretty good range. Protein powder versus whole food meals or whole protein meals. Is there a significant difference in absorption and how your body utilizes it? For example, 3 whole food meals with 3 shake meals versus 5 whole food meals and 1 shake meal. No, it's not. Outside of, you're getting a little bit more micronutrition through the whole food meals probably. It's not a big deal. Really, if you're using a quality powder, the absorption is going to be good. Like whey isolate, for example, it's going to be pretty good. And by bioavailability, I know different protein sources have different bioavailability. I've personally never really paid much attention to that. I've always been more of an advocate of getting a variety of protein sources. And as long as your digestion's good, you're going to absorb sufficient protein, and you're going to get a more variety of micronutrients and flavor and, you know, whatever from having variety. But if you need protein shakes in there to fill the protein and it's adherence issue with your schedule or whatever, then add the shakes. I mean, it's not the end of the day. But you're really splitting hairs with that, if I'm being completely honest. Like, I wouldn't do 6 shakes a day, but if you have to do a couple shakes, you know, instead of whole food, it's not really a huge issue. And there are other times where that might even be better from a digestion standpoint, just cutting down food volume and speeding up assimilation of the meal. So it's not a bad thing. Any information on protein powder labels and how to really tell if they're true versus amino spiking or false advertisement, what to look for? Well, I'm not an expert on protein powder labels. However, it's not really that hard to figure out. Easiest thing to do is look at the ingredient profile. If they're added amino acids, then they're fluffing the protein number, probably. Now, outside of maybe like a plant-based protein that might be adding more branched chain amino acids or more EAAs or something, or just more leucine or something to increase that protein synthesis, because they're just not as high in those BCAAs or EAAs, that could be a viable thing to do. But in a animal-based protein, especially a whey protein, it's not going to make a whole lot of sense to do that. So, and a lot of time you would see like added BCAAs in there, and that would contribute to the total protein content on the label, or they would add even lesser quality amino acids like glycine or something, which glycine in and of itself has some benefits, but you know, they would add that in there, and technically it would add to the protein total, which, you know, really isn't giving you what you need. So you should look for a protein that literally has, if you're taking a whey isolate, or even a whey blend or whatever, it should have whey isolate, maybe some flavorings, maybe like couple binders or something in there. That's it. You know, it shouldn't have a whole lot of anything else in it. It shouldn't have any other added amino acids in it. It should just have a whole protein source outside of potentially a plant-based protein powder. Like I said, could have some added amino acids for the reasons that I mentioned. So next one, opinions and info on, and if I say this wrong, my apologies, Desoxy T Acetate. I was a fan of Ferroplex back in the pro-hormone and legal designer steroid days, and from what I understand, it's an injectable version of that. Seems like it could be a pretty potent DHT component of a mass building stack, if anything, like the oral Ferroplex was. Yeah, I remember that when the pro-hormones were legal, though technically, if I'm not mistaken, this is actually basically Madol, I believe is how you say it, which is not really a pro-hormone. It's just it's an active, you know, it's an active steroid hormone. So, yeah, it's the Desoxy T Acetate version is an oil version versus an oral version, and from what I understand, it does have some pretty potent DHT components to it. Now, I've heard some weird things, like I've heard some weird things in terms of like mood and causing some other issues in that regard. And you got to remember, some compounds do alter neurotransmitter function and deplete certain things and deplete certain nutrients and cause some weird issues, like anxiety. I heard was pretty bad with this in some people. However, it's always going to be an individual thing. So if you back in the day, if you love the Ferroplex or whatever, I mean, it's probably not going to be much different. This is just an oil version versus an oral version. But yeah, usually very little water retention, anything like that. Some strong DHT properties could be used for the DHT component in a mass building snack, or could be used in a quote unquote cutting snack or contest prep or something like that for its cosmetic effect. Supposedly give a lot of vascularity and hardness and things like that, so it could be used for that as well. But that's a throwback. But the oil version, I don't see why it would really be any different. I know I believe that there was a methylated version. The oral version might have been methylated. I could be wrong, but I mean, even then, you're still pretty much getting the same hormone after it's metabolized. So, yeah, it's a good question. One more. Yeah. BPC 157 for tendon muscle repair and recovery. Any thoughts or experiences and recommendations as far as how often and dosage? Well, yeah, so there are studies on this, and they seem to be really all over the board. Anything from like, I'm trying to think, anything from like 100 to 800 micrograms per day, was something like that, or it was based on body weight, I believe. Something like 10 milligrams per, not milligrams, 10 micrograms per kg. 10 per kg, 2.2 kgs in a pound, so 20 some odd micrograms per pound. So if you weigh 150, if you weigh 200 pounds, then times 20, we'll just say times 20, 400. It would be much, actually add another zero. So yeah, that would be quite high, really, but most of the people are dosing it daily or even twice daily, and typically applied to the area or as close to the area or injury as possible. It's said to have some localized effects, so you need to be within the same fascial sheath. So like, give you an example, if it's shoulder, it needs to be in the fascia, inside that fascia capsule to get to the area. It couldn't be like applied to the pec and get to the shoulder type thing. I'm sure some of it goes systemic, maybe it doesn't, but if you want the most localized effect, then it's going to need to be like right in that area. Now, keep in mind, like a lot of people mess around with the research chemicals, which aren't even for human consumption. So, who knows what you're getting. Now, if you get a prescription for this and you go through like a good compounding pharmacy, like I know there's some out there like TaylorMade, Titan Medical might even have it. You can get like the real human grade prescribed peptides, and I'm sure that the dosing is going to work at that point. So you hear a lot of different results. Yes, it worked. No, it didn't do anything. I mean, that could all just be based on potency of the product or not applying it to the actual inside the close enough to the area. So, take that for what you will. But if you can actually get the real thing from an actual compounding pharmacy, then I'm sure if you apply in like that in the actual study dosage range, which I said is, I think the upper range was 10 mcg per kg, and it was clear down to like 1 mcg, so 1 to 10 is huge, of course. Probably going to get a pretty good result if it's the real thing. But yeah, a lot of these are blood building. These peptides are blood building, so they're going to help carry more nutrition and build vessels towards that area. So yeah, it would definitely help if it's real. And that's it for this week, guys. Thank you.